It's that time of year again. We've got you covered with a new safeguarding refresher course for the academic year 2023 to 2024. This is a free resource brought to you by the Safeguarding and Education team from Bristol City Council alongside the Keeping Bristol Safe partnership.
As with any safeguarding training, it's good to ensure that you stay safe during this session. Here are a few considerations to help you achieve this. The content can be difficult and triggering. Talking about child abuse and safeguarding can be a sensitive topic. It may resonate with our personal experiences or trigger professional experiences for children and families we are currently working with. Please do give yourself space and time during and following the training. If you are in a training session with other colleagues, please also support each other. If someone needs some time out, do consider checking in to see if they are okay. If you're watching this live with colleagues, do be mindful of confidentiality if you wish to talk about cases. Everyone has a right to a private life. Do anonymise cases. Imagine if it was your family that was being discussed. You may not be very happy that your family circumstances were discussed during a team training session. Respect each other's views. This is meant to be a safe learning environment. We will have different backgrounds, values and beliefs. If you disagree with someone, try not to make it personal and consider their truths, as we'd want others to consider ours. Please minimise distractions if this is a live session. Timekeeping. Designated safeguarding leads or training facilitators, you may wish to pause the video at this point to agree break times and when you expect to finish. For a good learning experience, it is important you feel comfortable to ask questions, although be mindful, if someone doesn't know the answer, they may need to get back to you.
Welcome back to those of you who are watching this on your inset days after a school holiday. We hope you've managed to recharge your batteries. This year's session has been designed to support reflection and have conversations around your practice, so hopefully a gentle way to ease back into the school term. The aims of the session is to refresh your safeguarding knowledge, update you on key changes in safeguarding both locally and nationally, and be able to apply these in the context of your day-to-day practice. The objectives are split over 4 different topic areas. Don't worry if you don't complete these all in one session. We encourage you to use your time having meaningful conversations. You can always watch the other objectives at another point in the academic year. The first objective is to update you on key changes in statutory guidance. Objective 2, safeguarding over sanctions. We want you to be able to reflect on your practice, particularly after the changes in statutory guidance from last year. Objective 3, child on child harm. There continues to be a high rate of incidents in Bristol and nationally. What can you do to help? And lastly, objective 4, safer working practice, making sure that you keep yourselves safe when you're working in your settings. This is a refresher session. This does not teach you the basics of safeguarding, and we hope that you've already completed that when you first joined the setting. If you feel that you need to repeat basic awareness training or that you've missed or not undertaken safeguarding awareness training, please speak to your DSL, designated safeguarding lead, to arrange a catch-up or to access a course. The Safer Schools app can give you free access to an online awareness course which you can complete to obtain a certificate. Keeping Children Safe in Education 2023. You'll be relieved to know there aren't that many changes this year. The changes that are there are for governors and senior leadership teams to consider. The Department for Education have recognised there have been a lot of changes over the years, and it would be helpful for you to be able to have time to consider embedding those changes into practice. The objectives in this training video reflect this. The changes in this version of guidance reflect newer duties for governance and leaders to ensure online safety awareness for staff and learners. There are more specific changes for your IT leads and designated safeguarding leads to work together to ensure the new government standards on filtering and monitoring are enacted and appropriate to your setting. Whilst many of your settings already have some of this in place, it's worth knowing what the duties are that are placed on the governance and senior leaders. These are to identify and assign roles and responsibilities to manage filtering and monitoring systems, review filtering and monitoring provision at least annually, block harmful and inappropriate content without unreasonably impacting teaching and learning. Have effective monitoring strategies in place that meet your settings community's safeguarding needs. I am anticipating that some of you have switched off at this point thinking that this doesn't apply to you. It's really important to consider what you can do to contribute and how online safety affects you. I'm sure we all have different experience of and relationships with technology, but there's no getting away from the fact that we rely on it more and more, regardless to whether you find it blissful not having your phone with you or you can't live without one. We cannot deny that we use and encourage the use of technology and software to make our work easier and more efficient. Here is a video from comedian Jake Lambert to get you to reflect and consider how you and the people around you will relate differently to technology. The video explores how different generations respond to withheld numbers. You may want to pause the video after to allow for a quick discussion on how this can relate to online safety in education settings.
I love the way different generations react to getting a call from a withheld number. First of all, you've got boomers, and they'll answer their phone, which, as a side note, would have been ringing at a volume just loud enough to drown out a marching band. But they will hang up as soon as they realise it's a cold caller, but that could take anything from 20 seconds up to 30 minutes. Then you've got Gen X. There's zero chance of them answering a call from a withheld number. Gen X love letting people know that their childhood wasn't surrounded by technology. This means they had to adapt to the Gen X slogans, basically tech savvy but not tech dependent and proud. So they wouldn't fall for a trick like a call from a withheld number, nor would they let it bother them. Millennials, however, would see they're getting a call from a withheld number and basically spiral to go into a full-on meltdown, start questioning who's after them, what they've done wrong, and wondering if they'll ever see their family again. Basically, a call from a withheld number is the worst thing that could ever happen to a millennial. Then you've got Gen Z. Again, they'll be split because the older ones would act just like millennials, but the younger ones will probably see they're getting a call from a withheld number, put the phone down for the first time that day, then pick it up 30 seconds later and start like the whole thing never happened.
Hopefully that brought a smile to your face, but often there's many a truth said in jest. The next generation, the Gen Alphas, again have a very different relationship with technology. Here's a quick clip from April Trilingual Parenting to illustrate this. Those of you who work in primary and early years, has this ever happened to you?
I'm an elementary school teacher, and students have accidentally called me different names. Mom, Mama. But today, I was called a name that I've never ever been called before. And this is how I know that I'm teaching a different generation, the Gen Alphas. A student today accidentally called me Alexa.
For your first exercise, take 10 minutes to get into groups or pairs to reflect on your experiences working with children and young people and their use of technology and the internet. What themes and trends have you noticed? Are there any concerns that we should be aware of? Identify 3 priorities for your setting to take forward for this academic year. Better still, rather than just think about your setting, think wider. Think about the Bristol Local Safeguarding Partnership in accordance to a One City approach. We respectfully ask that you submit your responses via the online survey using the QR code on the screen. We are hoping to reinstate our online safety working group to look at the common themes and curate some resources to support responding to the trends and the data that you share with us. Attendance continues to be an issue across all settings locally and nationally. The non-statutory guidance, Working Together to Improve School Attendance, has been in place for a year. This sets out clear expectations for schools and statutory agencies, the local safeguarding partnerships. These are health, police and the local authority. Following public consultation earlier this year and subject to parliamentary consent, the Secretary of State is committed to this guidance becoming statutory when parliamentary time allows. This will be no sooner than September 2023. The guidance largely focuses on working with families in a proportionate way and how settings and agencies around them can take action to address this. Hopefully this resonates with your settings work already. There are 6 steps that seek to standardise practice across the country. The first one, expect. Aspire to high standards of attendance from all children and parents and build a culture where all can and want to be in education and ready to learn by prioritising attendance improvements across the setting. Step 2. Monitor. Rigorously use attendance data to identify patterns of poor attendance at individual and cohort level as soon as possible so all parties can work together to resolve them before they become entrenched. Step 3. Listen and understand. When a pattern is spotted, discuss with children and parents and carers to listen to and understand barriers to attendance and agree how all partners can work together to resolve them. Step 4. Facilitate support. Remove barriers in school and help pupils and parents to access the support they need to overcome the barriers outside of school. This might include an early help or whole family plan where absence is a symptom of wider issues. Step 5. Formalize support. Where absence is persistent and voluntary support is not working or not being engaged with, partners should work together to explain the consequences clearly and ensure support is in place to enable families to respond. Depending on the circumstances, this may include formalizing support through a parenting contract or an education supervision order. And finally, step 6, enforce. Where all other avenues have been exhausted and support is not working or not being engaged with, enforce attendance through statutory intervention or prosecution to protect the pupil's right to an education. So let's talk about the elephant in the room. What impact has the pandemic had? It has been in the papers nationally that the impact on the children and their school attendance, but to what extent? What was the average number of sessions lost per year due to illness pre-pandemic? Pause the video whilst you get a few guesses from the audience. The answer is 351,245. So, what do you think the total number of sessions were lost due to illness 2021 to 2022? Just looking at the autumn and spring term only, do you think this number is higher or lower? Pause the video whilst you obtain a few guesses. The answer is higher. 638,314 sessions were lost. That's nearly double the amount for only 2 terms. So, what have we seen here locally in Bristol? We've seen increased absent rates, increased suspensions due to more challenging behaviours, increase in reported mental health issues such as anxiety, increase in elective home education requests, and we found it harder to engage with some of our more vulnerable families. Pause the video for 5 minutes to have a quick discussion about whether you've noticed anything in your setting. Does what you've noticed resonate with what's been happening here in Bristol? So, what can you do? Take another 5 to 10 minutes to discuss the following. Do you have any ideas of what you can do towards promoting a whole school culture? Have a go at articulating the benefits of good attendance. Safeguarding over sanctions. This next section is going to focus on, again, national and local developments and offer you opportunities to consider what this means in practice. The national picture. This government is committed to improving the behaviour and culture in all settings. All settings should be calm, safe and supportive environments where pupils and staff can thrive in safety and respect. No child should miss out on education because they feel unsafe, miss out on learning because their lesson is disrupted, or fall behind because their needs are not being identified or supported. Where behaviour is poor, children and staff can suffer from a number of issues: lost learning time, child-on-child abuse, anxiety, bullying, violence and distress. Behaviour in Schools 2022, Searching, Screening and Confiscation 2022, and Suspensions and Permanent Exclusions from Maintained Schools, Academies and Pupil Referral Units in England involving Pupil Movement 2023 have all been updated since the Child Safeguarding Practice Review of Child Q in Hackney, London. Child Q involved a discriminatory and disproportionate strip search being carried out on a black teenage girl occurring in full knowledge she was menstruating. National guidance was updated to reflect safeguarding duties, stronger in line with working together principles and keeping children safe in education. Duties were also made more explicitly to all guidance, including keeping children safe in education, to have regard to the Equality Act 2010 and the European Convention on Human Rights when disciplining children. Interventions must be lawful. For example, if you need to conduct a search, consider the obligations under the European Convention on Human Rights. Under Article 8, pupils have the rights to the respect of their private life. In the context of these rights and obligations, this means that pupils have the right to expect a reasonable level of personal privacy. The right under Article 8 is not absolute, it can be interfered with, but any interference with this right by a school or any public body must be justified and proportionate. A setting exercising those powers lawfully should have no difficulty in demonstrating that it also acted in accordance with Article 8. For those of you who are members of a governing body or a member of the setting's leadership team, the suspensions and permanent exclusions for maintaining schools, academies and pupil referral units in England involving pupil movement was updated in May 2023 with more technical elements. It is worth reviewing this document. When responding to and managing behaviour, you must consider behaviour as a communication of an emotional need, whether conscious or unconscious, and respond accordingly. The National Behaviour Survey provides us with data around what a cross-section of young people in England in education settings are worried about. The survey was designed to provide the Department for Education with a tool to monitor pupil behaviour in mainstream primary and secondary schools, allowing the department and wider stakeholders to track perceptions of behaviour over time in a consistent manner. The termly survey data is collected from multiple respondent groups, from school leaders, teachers, children and parents to allow for the triangulation of views, and is weighted to be nationally representative of teachers, settings and pupils for England. Using the government's own data, let's have a look at the reasons for worries, anxiety and depression shared by those children who were surveyed. 56% of respondents were worried about getting good grades in their exams. 41% of respondents were worried about their schoolwork. 30% of respondents were worried about their mental health. 29% of respondents were worried about making and maintaining friendships. 11% of respondents reported that bullying was a concern. 10% reported problems at home being a source of their worry or anxiety. If you want to generalise this equates to about 1 in 10 children in a cohort. 7% mentioned coping with learning difficulties or special educational needs and/or disability. 6% mentioned COVID-19, the pandemic. 5% mentioned climate change, and 2% mentioned not being able to access period products. Pause the video. Do you think these findings resonate with your understanding of working with children? Was there anything that shocked you? Do you think we're good at identifying the emotional needs of children who misbehave? Operation Encompass is a scheme which notifies education settings of when police have responded to incidents of domestic abuse. Here is a video that provides the background as to why it was set up.
Operation Encompass was created at the end of 2010. A Year 2 child came into his classroom in my school, and his teacher immediately sensed that his demeanour was different, and he couldn't tell us why. His behaviour started to change. First of all, he was refusing to come out of his classroom. Then he would hide under the tables in his classrooms. As the days went on, he just became more and more dysregulated. He started running from his classroom, and actually he started lashing out at those of us who were trying to help him. He couldn't tell us why, and his mother couldn't tell us why. We all broke up for the summer holiday. In the September, he started his new junior school. In the October, I had a visit from my education welfare officer. And actually, almost as a passing comment, she said, "Oh, you know, I've had a notification about that child." And I said I had had no notification whatsoever. And she then went on to detail an incredibly violent domestic abuse incident that had happened in that little boy's home in June. And straight away, I knew that that is why his behaviours had changed, and I was both furious and devastated. I was devastated because we'd failed that child, but we were failed as a school because nobody had shared that information with us. So I went home that night and I said to David what had happened, and David actually just sat there and went quiet because he knew that the police had that information, and he knew that there must be a way in which he could enable schools to have that information straight away so that that would never happen to a child again. And that's how Operation Encompass was born.
We have had our own version in Bristol called the Bristol Safeguarding Notification Scheme since 2014. In Bristol, we notify settings of all safeguarding concerns, not just domestic abuse. Bristol is now part of the National Operation Encompass scheme following the statutory guidance, the Domestic Abuse Act 2021. We share information with your setting safeguarding staff about children in your setting who've experienced safeguarding incidents when the police have been involved. This is so you can be aware and provide a trauma-informed approach to managing behaviour. To punish and verbally chastise a child for an often natural response to trauma through their behaviour can make it worse and compound their experience. Belonging. What does it mean to you? Belonging is that sense of being somewhere where you can be confident that you will fit in and feel safe in your identity. As education settings are one of the few shared social institutions which can create a sense of belonging or exclusion, it's vital that they're places of welcome and safety. Bristol has a belonging strategy, which we hope you're already aware of. There is also some local guidance, those of you who are teachers, called the Leading Edge, which can support you with tips and support you if you're likely to be involved in the management of behaviour. These are both hyperlinked in the description if you'd like to read these. However, let's just bring it down to a human level. In the National Behaviour Survey, children were asked to what extent, on a scale of 1, never, to 5, always, how much they felt they had an adult at school who really cared about them, told them when they're doing a good job, listens to them when they have something to say, and believes that they will be a success. This doesn't feel overly complicated, and you don't need specialist training or qualifications to demonstrate these. Take 5 to 10 minutes to discuss what actions do you take to support a child to feel like they belong, and is it easy to be this person to all children that you're working with? Pause the video. Another area where things can often get conflated and children are often villainised or adultified is in our record keeping. Let's have a go at flipping the script. Remember, your language matters. Language like this is used to make judgments and tells us very little of what the child is doing or has done. When information is shared to another person, they will shape an understanding based on the words that you've used. It's really important that you think about your language when recording and reporting. Pick a couple of boxes. Can you rephrase the wording that doesn't unjustly put the responsibility or onus on the child? Let's do one together. A child may be described as "we're not engaged." However, if we change the phrase to "we cannot engage the child with this service," this opens the solution-focused or problem-solving approach. For example, the reason for why engagement may be difficult are that services may be somewhere unsafe or that they're too far for the child to get to. To put the onus on the child will be unfair. Pause the video for another 5 to 10 minutes to pick a couple and come up with more constructive, supportive language. Take a well-deserved break. Listen to your training facilitator and be back by the time they've suggested. On to our next objective, child-on-child harm. In particular, we're going to look at how you respond to prejudice-based bullying. Child-on-child harm, in particular bullying, features in all national government safeguarding and behaviour guidance. This broadly accounts for 70% of Ofsted complaints against establishments here locally in Bristol. The National Behaviour Survey says that 22% of people said they'd been a victim of bullying for any reason in the past 12 months. Of those, 45% reported that they were bullied in person and 52% reported that they were bullied online. In most reported cases, children said they were bullied by other children at their setting, although 4% had said they'd been bullied by someone else. Here are the types of face-to-face bullying that was reported from the National Behaviour Survey. Have you got any observations? Pause the video while you have a discussion. From the same survey, here are the types of bullying that occur online. Do you have any observations? Pause the video for a discussion. Hopefully you identified that many of the concerns were around a child's single or intersecting protected characteristic. When thinking about online safety, what do you think that can drive discrimination or bullying? What is happening nationally that can shape the attitudes of your children and families? Do you think social media plays a role in reinforcing discrimination and bullying? How? Do you have an awareness of peer group attitudes and values, and what mechanisms do you already have in place to counteract negative and discriminatory views? Pause the video for a brief discussion. Okay, let's take a moment to reflect and recap on your understanding of child-on-child harm. Take 10 minutes to discuss in pairs or groups the following. What's the difference between child-on-child harm or peer-on-peer abuse? What do we need to consider when we use the terms victim and perpetrator? And what's the difference between prejudice-based bullying or hate crime? The difference between child-on-child harm or peer-on-peer abuse. Using the word child reminds us even those who harm may also need help and support. You risk adultification or criminalising children who harm others. It is more than likely that there's a vulnerability at home or something going on in their personal life which has contributed towards their behaviour. Using the term peer implies there's a potential positive relationship and the relationship is equitable. This may not be the case. The child that harms may have a privilege or power over their targets. What do we need to consider when we use the terms victim and perpetrator? Keeping children safe in education tells us to avoid using the terms victim and perpetrator. There is a time and place for this discourse. It implies that an investigation has already taken place and judgment has already been made, where this may not always have been the case. It can influence whether you put interventions exclusively with the children directly involved and not always on the children on the periphery or who are bystanders. Vulnerable children who harm may not get the support and get disproportionately sanctioned or criminalised. Imagine if this was your child, those of you who are parents. Using the terms victim and perpetrator can also create an idea of risk which may not be present. It is much better if you use the children's actual names and label the behaviour. For example, child A hit child B, not that child A perpetrated harm to child B who was the victim. What's the difference between prejudice-based bullying or hate crime? Bullying can take many forms. It's a behaviour that can be physical, cyber, online, or verbal. Prejudice-based bullying is when bullying behaviour is motivated by prejudice based on an individual's actual or perceived identity. It can be based on a protected characteristic unique to a child or young person's identity or circumstance. Sometimes bullying can be criminal, but not all incidents are. While still harmful, bullying is something that you can and should be able to manage and deal with at a universal level in providing guidance, discipline, and support. If you perceive behaviour on a spectrum, criminal acts will be on the high end of impact on the target and will be subject to breaching someone else's rights and safety. Criminal acts can include assault, harassment, or criminal damage. A crime is when you may want to contact the police to consider whether further action is warranted. It is really important to bring nuance and understanding to ensure that you do not unduly raise anxiety, worries, and risk. Equally, we need to understand and potentially carry out an investigation without labelling, judging, or potentially criminalising a child due to lazy discourse and language used. Focusing on the impact of harm can be used to support reconciliation, repair relationships, and build resilience. Education settings need to educate to minimise discord and support children and communities in line with the public sector equality duty. Hate crime is a subject which can provoke powerful reactions within our society. The term itself is subject to multiple definitions and understandings. In England and Wales, it is generally used to refer to the aggravation of the seriousness of existing criminal offences such as assault, harassment, or criminal damage because there is an additional hostility element. Specifically, that in committing the offence, the offender was motivated by or the offender demonstrated hostility towards a protected characteristic of the victim. For both prejudice-based bullying and/or a hate crime, a zero-tolerance approach is important. This is to recognise, record and report. It is important that your designated safeguarding lead is aware and can identify areas of work, either directly with the children involved or whether contextual approaches are required, like a peer or year group intervention or a whole school intervention such as the use of assemblies or policy development. Zero tolerance doesn't mean and shouldn't mean throwing the full force of a behaviour policy at a child. So, what shape is this? Shout out your answers. I'll give you 10 seconds. Most of you would have said a wonky square. This is a piece of artwork from Troika called Squaring the Circle. As you can see, there's often more than one perspective about the same thing. Have a think whether you welcome different experiences and respect them in your practice, or whether you are someone who can only think about your own experiences and push them on others. An absolutist takes a definitive position, for example, who is right and who is wrong, often seeking one truth over another's. Or are you a colleague who can respect and acknowledge multiple perspectives to help support harmony? It's all about respecting other people's truths. It doesn't always have to be either or, it can be both and. So what can you do? Let's have a think about what actions you can take and considerations you can make. Make sure you respond, not react to cases. Reacting in a rushed manner can lead to poor decisions. Responding can mean you take your time to ensure that you're covering all your bases. Respond to all cases. Inaction can be interpreted as permissive. Often when we refer to zero tolerance, it doesn't necessarily mean that you punish the child with the full force of your behaviour policy, but to ensure that you respond to all cases. Do consider looking at the wider peer group, class or year group, and even whole school interventions. Many complaints that we have received in Bristol are from parents and carers who are friends of the children directly involved, speculating on incidents. Whilst you don't have to disclose confidential details, you can ensure that the school community are aware that concerns are taken seriously and remind wider parents or communities of how to report a concern. The safety and welfare is a paramount consideration for all children involved. It's not just the children directly involved that can experience harm. There may be other peer-related issues that may have not been disclosed, and the incident that you are dealing with might be symptomatic of a bigger issue. Decisions should be in the best interest of the child, ensuring safety planning. Make sure you take a proportionate approach. Remember, children who harm may be communicating a need or displaying trauma through their behaviour. Arbitrary approaches to implementing your behaviour policy may not resonate or be effective for supporting that child in the longer term. No one is saying that behaviours don't receive sanctions, but think about what the long-term goal is and take the time to ensure that actions are proportionate, in the best interest of the child, and constructive. No one likes to be told off. However, there are ways and means to ensure that interventions are meaningful and worthwhile. Work together with your designated safeguarding leads and other professionals. We need to work together to ensure that our collective efforts can be helpful for those children who need it. Remember, you may not have the whole picture, but safeguarding is everybody's business. It may be that you are the most appropriate person to implement mending relationships. This is to ensure that work is consistent with any wider safety or needs plans that the children may already have in place. Discipline with humility and integrity. The quote from Daniel Siegel is pertinent. Too often we forget that discipline really means to teach, not to punish. A disciple is a student, not a recipient of behavioural consequences. Often, behaviour policies are implemented without consideration for teachable moments. To do this requires patience and perspective. Remember to respect and acknowledge everyone's truths. Looking for the teachable moments are really key in attempting to reduce ongoing tensions and repeat incidents. Educate Against Hate has a useful government-backed website that helps with teaching resources and also resources for parents and carers. Taking a growth mindset means using your energies to support change and development of behaviour. Black and white absolutist thinking is unhelpful, risk avoidant, and just ends up moving the problem or transferring it on to somebody else. Sadly, there continues to be a high use of punitive interventions in line with behaviour policies without any interventions or proportionate conversations happening in between to prevent escalation and repeat behaviours. The public sector equality duty includes the need to foster good relations between persons who share a relevant protected characteristic and persons who do not share it. Low threshold cultures and settings have disempowered staff and children to take and engage with restorative approaches. Whilst this may help you manage your resource in the short term, it does increase the level of work for the next setting, the system, and the cost of the child's identity and education. Arguably, this does not help a child feel like they belong and may contradict your legal duty under the public sector equality duty. On to our last objective, safer working practice. Let's refresh your knowledge. In pairs or groups, take 10 minutes to define the following: whistleblowing, the harm test, and low-level concerns. Pause the video whilst you have a discussion. Whistleblowing. Whistleblowing refers to when a worker makes a disclosure of information which they reasonably believe shows wrongdoing or someone covering up wrongdoing. You often need to implement this when you have exhausted raising this and your concerns have not been listened to, and/or the person that you need to raise the concerns to is the person you have concerns about. The NSPCC has a national whistleblowing helpline. You can use this if you don't have confidence in your own organisation's process. The harm test. This is documented in both statutory guidance working together to safeguard children and keeping children safe in education. This is when a member of staff or volunteer is thought to have behaved in a way which has harmed a child or may have harmed a child, and/or possibly committed a criminal offence against or related to a child, and/or behaved towards a child or children in a way which indicates that he or she may pose a risk of harm to children, and/or behaved in a way or may have behaved in a way which indicates that they may not be suitable to work with children. These cases need to be reported to the local authority designated officer, otherwise known as LADO. He will coordinate an investigation or an assessment of the situation. Low-level concerns. A low-level concern is a concern, no matter how small, and even if no more than causing a sense of unease or nagging doubt, that an adult working in or on behalf of the school or college may have acted in a way that is inconsistent with the staff code of conduct, including inappropriate conduct outside of work, and does not meet the harm threshold, or is otherwise not serious enough to consider a referral to the local authority designated officer. These incidents are normally dealt with by the head teacher or principal and can result in, depending on the concern, being recorded on a colleague's staff file, the colleague being provided with additional training and support, and/or the adjustment to a wider settings policy and procedures. Okay, let's go through a scenario. What would you do? You witnessed a physical intervention by a colleague of a child who was dysregulated. You offered help, but they said they were fine and they had it under control. The child had sustained bruising during this time. You typed up a statement of what you saw as per the settings policy. You checked the record again to ensure follow-up, and your account had been changed to make the child's behaviour appear worse than what it was. Pause the video to have a think about what you would do if you were in this position. Ensure the child has received any appropriate first aid response to the injury and parents and carers have been informed. This should be reported to your head teacher as the child had sustained bruises and therefore meets the harm test. The head teacher will then refer this on to the local authority designated officer. The Teaching and Regulation Agency is responsible for investigating serious misconduct where a teacher's alleged behaviour is fundamentally incompatible with being a teacher and could lead them to being prohibited from teaching, and prohibiting teachers from teaching who have been found to have committed serious misconduct. The purpose of a prohibition order are to protect children, maintain public confidence in the teaching profession, and support schools in upholding proper standards of conduct. The majority of cases referred are related to inappropriate behaviour of a sexual nature, such as sharing personal details, befriending children on social media, making inappropriate comments and gestures, creating or holding images of children, engaging or attempting to engage in sexual activity with a child. Let's have a game of higher or lower. Do you think the number of referrals to the TRA in 2022 to 23 was higher or lower than the preceding year of 21 to 22, where there were 714 referrals? Pause the video to get some guesses. The answer is higher at 1,038. Of those that progressed to hearings following further assessment, were the number of hearings in 2022 to 23 higher or lower than the preceding year of 21 to 22, in which there were 149? Pause the video to get some guesses. The answer is higher at 207. Why do we think the number may have risen? Pause the video for a quick discussion. Things that we have seen locally are improvements in low-level concern reporting, such as increased staff vigilance, the longer-term impact of COVID, feeling more isolated and an increase in mental health concerns. Staff are dealing with an increase in the volume of needs of their settings community and the children you work with. The cost of living crisis, leading to some colleagues to experience stress around debt, increased pressures. We may consider similar reasons for the increase of the number of issues we see within the families in our settings community. It is easy to forget that we're all impacted by the same pressures, and staff will often act in the ways that we've not seen before in response to the additional pressures you find yourselves under. You are all encouraged to be professionally curious, or if you're just plain nosy, you can receive updates on hearings conducted by the TRA, which are all publicly available. Use the QR code to sign up for alerts. It would be good practice to reflect on interesting cases and bring learning to staff meetings throughout the academic year. Here is some free support from Education Supports, a national charity. Some settings already have their employee assistance programs, which we encourage you to access before your problems and worries become acute. On the Education Support website, there are free guides around a range of needs, such as working life, anxiety, stress, depression, burnout, finances, grief or bereavement, personal life, and self-care. Use the QR code to access these. That's it from us. Thank you for your engagement, and we hope you have found the contents helpful. Yes, we have gone QR code crazy this year. Take a lucky dip of some clips that will hopefully bring a smile to your face at the end of today's session.